In this section, we'll cover how to leverage the entity library to reduce boilerplate. In this first video, we'll talk about how to set up and introduce a concept called the adapter. The adapter is the core class that we're going to use throughout the entity library, and it does contain a lot of interesting utility methods that's going to be able to remove a lot of the code that you need to write if you weren't using the entity library. So the content of this video is as follows. First off, we'll talk about dry, the dry principle that means to not repeat yourself. Because here's the thing, when we start using Redux, when we start using NGRX, we need to write the same concepts, the same files over and over again. We need to write things like actions, reducers, selectors for each and every entity. And imagine that you have 20 or 30 different entities inside of a project, or even more. That becomes a lot of files. We want to avoid some of that repeated code. We'll also look at how to actually install the library, and in doing so, obviously, we need to scaffold an Angular project. After we've done that, we aim to show the data inside of a component, and you get to see what it looks like to actually use this adapter class, because it does differ. It does differ in how it stores its data, but it's doing it in a really smart way. So with all of that said, let's head to our terminal and let's try to scaffold an Angular project, and let's also add the entity library as a dependency to our project. Okay, so we're inside of our terminal and we have just entered the commands for creating a new Angular project. We're typing ng new and the name of our project. We are creating the project and it's asking us for some defaults. We're going to aim to select a few like this, and it's going to create a bunch of files, and it's also going to fetch some dependent libraries that it needs to run the Angular project. Now, by now, most of you are probably Angular developers that have created an Angular project or two, so you know all about how this goes. Okay, great. Now we're at the stage where we have scaffolded our Angular project, and the remaining bits we need to do is to install the store library and the entity library. So just by us typing npm install, and we are ready to proceed. Okay, so we're inside of Visual Studio Code. We are looking at our Angular project, and as usual, we start off in the app module ts file, because this is where we set up the store module and other dependent libraries. So first off, we have the store module here. We call for root, which is us setting up the root state. We can see that we got three different properties. We got counter with a counter reducer, products with a products reducer. We got customers with a customers reducer. And per usual, the reducers here are simply functions that's able to digest your state change in a pure way. So let's look at one of these reducers so we get a sense for what we're talking about. Let's start off with the products reducer, like so. Looking at our products reducers or list reducers in general, we see that they have X number of messages, and messages is in the form of different cases here. So we have a switch case construct, and we can see that we are supporting add, we are supporting remove, load, and we are supporting update. Looking through these, we see that they are very simple in its nature and that they are changing data in an immutable way. So here you can see that it's taking the existing list and simply adding the new product that we're talking about. With the remove, we are simply filtering out the product that we don't want. With the products load, we simply replace whatever we had in there in our state with the action payload. With products update, we go through our list and we try to affect the item at hand by saying, well, if you are the item that should be affected, we replace you with the action payload. And if you're not, then just simply return the product that we have in our list. This is to not mess up any kind of order that we have in our product list. However, looking at the customers reducer file, we see that it looks pretty much the same, right? So the customers reducer is a copy-paste pretty much of the products reducer. And the reason for that is that they are both a list type struct, right? So we still have some kind of array, some kind of list. We see that we are supporting the messages add, remove, load, and update. And we're doing it in the exact same way as we would in the products reducer. Literally the only difference is the name. It's called customers reducer instead of products reducer, and the messages starts with customers instead of products. That's the only difference. Now imagine now that you got 20, 25, 30 plus entities of type list. That's going to be a lot. right? There's going to be a lot to type and a lot of repetition. And it's not very dry. It's not very don't repeat yourself. This is the main reason why we are going to use the adapter class instead to remove a lot of this boilerplate. So let's head back to the products reducer because we have prepared a bit here. We have prepared some code here that we have commented out, but now it's time to actually replace whatever we're doing here with the adapter code. Okay then, we have commented back our code here, these 3 lines, and we can see that we have one where we declare an interface that extends the entity state. We have one line in which we create an adapter and a third line in which we create an initial state. Now the entity state comes from the NGRX entity library, and we simply declare something called state here, and we say that it's of type product. We're going to be using this one later when we define the initial state. As for creating the adapter instance, we actually need to call the created entity adapter with the type product. Should just say that product is a very simple beast. It's ID, name, and price, and that's pretty much it. Once we have an adapter instance, we're able to work with that, and we're able to call getInitialState. Now this gives us an initial state that we can replace this one with. So here we simply do initial state and say you're the initial state instead. And the main reason for doing it this way is that the initial state of an adapter looks a bit different than it does for a normal type here. So you wouldn't have an array as the simplest thing. But we will show this inside of the browser so you understand what I mean. For now though, let's try to use the adapter instance and let's start replacing what we do here. So instead of us doing this return state action payload thing, we can just go adapter add 1, and then we can give it the product that we want to change with, which is the action payload. That's our new product, and we need to give it the pre-existing state. So, and we can simply remove this line there, and we type return instead there. And instead of doing our remove the way we do it, we do return adapter remove 1. And we just need to tell it what to remove, right? Okay, so we just need to point out the key that it needs to use to remove things, and we assume that we are sending in an action payload consisting of the product and the product itself to have an ID. We do it like that, and then we give it the pre-existing state, and that's pretty much it. Just do this, remove that. So you can see here we can line by line just replace what we have with adapter calls. So let's see which one we need. So we use the one called add all, and that's pretty much giving it a list of products, as you can see. We're going to do just that because we assume that what comes in here is an array, so action payload and the pre-existing state as usual. You can see this is pretty simple, and you can just imagine the scale of this working with 25 plus entities, that they all use this code and you write it once, right? Yes, you might need to scaffold these files X number of times, but at least it's copy-paste on the rest. Products update is simply doing return adapter update 1. And as usual, we just give it the action payload like so and the pre-existing state. And that's it. We have actually replaced all of our boilerplate code with the adapter's code, and yeah, as you can see, the adapter consists of a bunch of different methods like this, so we can actually have a look at that. We have only scratched the surface, so add one, add many, add all, remove several different kinds, update, upsert, and so on. So you see it's very, very powerful, this adapter, so definitely recommend you to use it. Now, we're going to go to the browser because we're going to fire this application up, so you'll be able to see how the state differs, because it does differ, and it's important to know that it differs from a reducer that you normally would write. Okay, so we're still inside VS Code. We're just going to show a few things before we head off to the browser and look at things. We have done two things here. One is listening to state products, and the other bit is to listen to customers. Those two are a bit different now since we started using the adapter. Having a look at our app state here, we can see that we have given it the type product state, and we see that customers are, well, they are any, but in reality, they are of type array of type customer, right? So product state is simply our entity state. What does that mean? So we have an entity state of type product. That means if we look at entity state as an interface, we see that it consists of two properties. One is IDs and the other one is entities. So this one will give us an array of IDs back, and this one will give us a, yes, you're right, we are getting a dictionary back. We're not getting a list back. This is interesting, right? Because we expected products and customers to be a list, but suddenly we have turned products into a dictionary. How will that work? Well, let's have a look at this in the browser, because it might get a bit theoretical just looking at interfaces. Let's see in the browser exactly what happens. Okay, so we are inside of our browser. We have console logged out the two different states, products and customers, and we just wanted to see how they're different. We've already talked about it inside of VS Code. We have looked at different interfaces for entity state, for example, and we can see how products and customers differ. Looking at products, we see that when we expand it, we see that it contains an entities property, and entities itself is a dictionary, which is, well, fundamentally different from a list, right? And that means that if we were to use an ng4 at this point to try to show it, we wouldn't be able to. We would need to transform it first. Looking at customers, though, we see that it's a straight up list, so no changes there. On the other hand, customers is not using the adapter yet. So we will need to learn how to adjust to this new reality, and the answer here is to use the correct selector. Okay, so we've come to the summary of this video, so let's see what we've actually learned. So first off, we scaffolded an Angular project and we installed the store module, and we also installed the entity module. So we'd be able to use NGRX, but now with this added capability of entity, right? So next step was to show a reducer, a product reducer, and a customer reducer. And we noticed that we repeated the exact same code. So literally the only differences here were the function name and the name of the different events. But all the code, how to add something to a list, remove from a list, or replacing the list with incoming data, all of that was exactly the same. At this point, we introduced something called the adapter. We've showed how we could, by using the adapter and all its utility methods, we could actually migrate a reducer to use the adapter and all that nice pre-made functionality. So we took the product reducer, we introduced the adapter, and suddenly all that boilerplate just disappeared. So lastly, when we used the adapter to migrate this reducer, we also introduced something called the entity state. Now the entity state is a different beast altogether, because suddenly your products list was not a list anymore, but a dictionary. So what does that mean for us? Obviously that means that we can't use a directive like ng4 and just show that data straight up. We need to transform it somehow. So to know how to transform it, we'll be introducing something called selectors. And that's our next video. So we'll talk about entity selectors and how to use a create selector helper method to actually get the selectors you want from this data. Because right now we're not entirely happy. We've managed to make the boilerplate disappear, but we are in a state where the data looks different. So we need to get back on track. So stay with me.